Hello, everybody. So, after last week and we decided to do all of the thumbnailing for our project, you should have 8 pages of your comic ready to go. So our next step is going to be the part that gets interesting. This is when we're going to start making this look nice. The next stage is one you guys are probably familiar with. It's inking. And for a long time, I didn't really want to ink my books because I came from animation and painting, and I would just like draw a thumbnail and go straight into final painting with it. I never did tight lines. So inking for me was a really difficult transition, but because of the way that production in comics works, I find that having fully inked comics is the clearest way to get your message across with the most economic method of making art. Because I think that if you are doing too much where you're painting every panel, it's going to take you forever, for one thing. And for another thing, you're not going to be able to like pass it on easily. So if you do traditional inking, like what we have here in this image, it'll be a lot easier for you to be able to get help with flatting or coloring or anything like that. All right, so we're going to get into inking. So I grabbed a couple examples of just like some pages of inks that I really, really love. And I love black and white. I love manga. And a big part of that is because of the clarity. Without, too much painting, without too much contrast with, highlights and stuff, I think you read these images very quickly, which I think is what makes them very effective. And there's all sorts of different kinds of inking. Like your inking style, your hand as you're doing inking is going to vary based on who you are as an artist. For example, we have some Ronald Searle at the top here, and he had like a very kind of scratchy and textural line, which I think looks really cool and would be amazing in a comic. And then we have an example down here where there's a lot of heavy blacks, like really, really thick ink lines that are very dependent on creating shapes with those blacks, which is also very cool. And then we have this example from manga, which the ink line is actually not, I think it's actually like a pencil, but it's not true ink, but it is serving the function of an inking layer. This is where everything gets tied down, everything gets defined, but you can use different materials. Like that's going to be a big part of this next process. So there's so many ways to ink, right? So digital inking, which is great because there's a lot of flexibility in terms of if you have notes to address, that's a really useful tool. I do most of my work digitally inked, mostly because I'm just comfortable with that material. But you could also do real media inking. A lot of comics artists to this day are still doing all of their inks by hand. And I'm actually really interested in doing my next book by hand, just because I think that there is something about the fact that you can't zoom in or out of real media that actually like makes you a little more careful with it, as opposed to digital, which I think can get a little rushed just because you have that flexibility. Obviously, there's upsides and downsides to both. It just kind of depends on whatever it is that you're most comfortable with. Of course, with a short project like what we're doing, you do either one, but because short projects are kind of a great tryout for longer projects, it's a really good way for you to experiment and to see, do I like digital inking? Do I like inking with a brush and pen, or whatever it is that you want to try. There also is probably like different ways to ink too, like 3D inking. I don't know, maybe. There's a lot of, the new Oculus stuff that's really cool, and who knows, like that's just a part of this process where you're going from some rough idea and you rough out the whole story, and now this is the first stage, so we're just making it look nice at this point. Digital inking. So there's a lot of different apps you can do this with. Photoshop. I've been using Photoshop for decades, and the great thing about Photoshop is that it is the industry standard, which means that you can hand it off to somebody else and they'll be able to open a PSD. Clip Studio Pro. I am loving Clip Studio for comics work. I've mentioned it before in a previous lesson, but inking in Clip Studio is so cool because of some of the tools that they have with their vector inking. I really think that, if you want to experiment with a new tool, Clip Studio has just got some really, really nice comics-focused tools. Procreate. I've done like 4 books in Procreate. Most of my books have been in Procreate for a couple of reasons. One, because I like to work and travel, and that was a lifestyle I wanted for myself. So I had to figure out a way to do that, and Procreate was a huge part of that. The other thing is Procreate's brushes really nice. Like the way that they respond and their, the different textures and edges to them. I just have favorite brushes in Photoshop or Procreate that I like cannot replicate in Photoshop or Clip Studio. There's just something about Procreate's inking that really good. The other thing I really love about Procreate is the hold to create a straight line. I almost can't live without it. And as much as I want to say I love Clip Studio, Procreate is still kind of my go-to, partly because of the hold for ellipse and the hold for straight line. Both of those things make inking so much faster than it would be otherwise. So whatever app works for you. You could also ink in Comic Draw, which is the thing that I showed you guys how to use last time with the thumbnailing. They also have an inking tool in there, and they have their own brushes and stuff like that. So you can ink in whatever tool you like, whatever feels good for you. But those are kind of the ones I recommend. Real Media inks. So again, like I said, Real Media has a lot of advantages too. Like there's a textural quality you just can't quite capture in digital. There is something also about like your hand and your eye and being able to see with unlimited resolution through your eyeballs that is really nice with Real Media inks. So that is something to really consider. If you're really comfortable with Real Media, then like this might be the way to go for a number of reasons. Part of it is like the artistry. It's just really nice. The other great thing about Real Media inks, you can sell them later. With digital art, because everything I do is digital, I really can only sell the book as a book, as a licensed piece. But if I had actual original inks, then it'd be a lot easier for me to like go to a convention and sell those original pages. Without Real Media, you can't really do that. So you are missing out on a little bit of an income stream in that sense if you decide to go with digital inks. But of course, the ease of digital inks with the editing and being able to erase and layers, all that stuff, there's a lot of different things to consider here. So I do like Real Media. It just depends on, the process, how quick your deadline is coming up, and how much you want to have an original at the end. So yeah, you can use any material you're comfortable with. Brush and ink, I really love a lot of the newer Sandman comics that have been doing brush and ink for their inks. It just looks so beautiful. Nib pens, micron pens, ballpoint pens even. I've seen some really, really cool work with ballpoints for Real Media ink. Line weight. So this is something I think that we should discuss. Line weight is very important because it helps you define things that are in front of other things. They could also help define shapes and volumes. So if you're going to go with like a really stylized look, kind of like the one on the far right, we're using a lot of blacks in order to like hold the page together, create silhouettes, and also to describe form. So being really in control of your line weight is going to really, really help you with communication at this level. I also grabbed this example of the city because there's a lot of different line weights going on. We got like really thin line weights for details, bolder lines for edges of buildings and things that are like touching air. That's usually the way that I like to think about it. Anything that's like touching that is not like a detail inside of a shape, but is actually something that has air that all the way around it. Like I want to put a thicker line around that. That's even true here in this really stylized piece on the left bottom. We do have a lot of line weights here, and that gives variation, makes it interesting, and also helps me know like what is part of what object. So yeah, basically what I said. You can use line weight to push detail forward and backward, something that's far away, a mountain, clouds, there's going to have a lighter line weight as opposed to something that's close up. Separating elements from each other. Inking, I think, is really where you're going to put the most effort into the clarity of the artwork. So it's really important to be able to use line weight so that objects are separate from each other. And of course, emphasis. Line weight can be really good for you to be like, this is the thing you should be looking at. You want to have detail in your panels too, but at the same time, using line weight can really help your audience clearly read what's happening in the panel. So that's pretty much it for the lecture. I know it's another short one, but again, this is another lesson that I think would be much more clearly explained as a demo as opposed to just a lecture. So, all right, we're going to go into demo next. All right, so to get started on the demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the thumbnail page that we made in Comic Draw and import it into Procreate. I'm going to show you guys how I ink in Procreate, and then I'll switch over and show you guys how I would do it in Comic Draw, or sorry, in Clip Studio. So first of all, the cool thing about when Comic Draw exports is it exports the lettering layer separate from the sketching layer. If you had wanted to do an inking layer in Comic Draw, like you can absolutely do that. It would come in as a separate group. So then there would be another group here that would say inking layer. So for now, what we have though is we've got the lettering layer, which has all of the place text, and then we have the boxes or the panels, and then we also have the sketches. So I think that looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do now is actually, I'm going to turn off the sketching group. It's not that important to me. And what I'm going to do is actually turn down the opacity of the lettering. Because, as I said earlier, I actually find that when you're doing your own inks, I like the panels and the text to actually have the same line quality. I think it makes it just look better. So let's kind of experiment a little. Let's see. Oops, that's a black pen, red pen. Okay, so we did a bunch of sketching earlier, some of the design stuff. So if we want to use kind of that like line, that like the line that we were working on in in Clip Studio, I think that this is pretty close. So we're going to use this brush. And of course, like you can find many different brushes and all kinds of different, gum roads and artists that you like. I also really like, for Procreate, I really like the brushes that, let's see, the Comics Max Pack is great by Maxi Licky. He has incredible brushes. Sheen's ink brushes, I did all of Hungry Ghost with this brush. I really like that one too. Joe Lillington. These are Joe Lillington's brushes, and he has like this really nice watercolory texture to his brushes that I really like. Like these are really cool, kind of like a nice like crunchy feel. So yeah, you kind of want to do that in the design stage. So usually what I would do is do the designs in the same app that I was going to be doing my inking in, but I want to show you guys how I would do it in Procreate and in Clip Studio. So I wanted to just show you guys what this looks like. I'm just going to use this for now just to show you the process. So one of the things that I like to do, like I said, I want to redraw all these panels, right? So what you could do is you could just do the hold for the Procreate to create a nice straight line. But again, that's going to depend on what your drawing looks like. I kind of think it looks a little too computery. I do use it sometimes for like books that I want to have more of a like a tight line feel, but most of the time I'm actually going to go in and just like by hand redraw these panels. And as you can see, like it's not perfect. Like there's a lot of little waviness on it, but I like that. I think that actually makes it feel more handmade and makes it feel less digital. And that's what I'm always trying to do. I'm trying to make things not as stiff as they would be if I just did everything purely digitally. So I like these little wavy lines. Again, it's a taste thing, it's a preference thing, and you can just do a tap hold to create like a nice straight line. And I do that for certain books, but for this one, because I want it to feel kind of inky and natural, I'm gonna just actually draw these by hand. For some of these panels that connect, what I'm actually going to do is draw one line and then I'm going to erase between them because I want them to feel like they are one set. If that makes sense. And I'm going to actually separate my my word bubbles and caption boxes from my panels. And I do that because when we get to the lettering stage, and if you're going to be lettering in InDesign, which I have found to be the easiest lettering tool, it just makes it easier if you want to alter anything later on. So I'm just going to go back in here and erase that little bit in there. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go do the exact same thing. So now that we know how large the text is going to be, drawing these boxes for the captions and the lettering is going to be much, much easier. So this one is like touching here, and I don't really like that. So I'm actually going to scoot it in a little. But again, because I kind of have a guideline from using Comic Draw, I can estimate, okay, that I can scoot that over that much, and that feels right. I like using this technique for a project like this because, yeah, that's supposed to be kind of a fairy tale. So it makes it feel like, oh, these are pieces of paper. And we can emphasize that even more if we wanted to, like create little notches and, you know, little marks on the paper for the caption if we wanted to. So because these, the text actually sits over the lines here, I'm going to want to make sure that I have a white layer to make sure that it blocks off the panel lines. So I'm going to create a new layer to do the text on it. And again, I don't want this to be too tight. You can do it tight though, like you can hold it and then it'll actually draw a circle for you, which is one of my favorite things about Procreate is the hold to create a line, because it's just so useful for inking. I'm not using it now because I think that that's just not the style of book that I'm doing, but I do generally find it to be really, really useful. Alright, so we're going to create a new layer, and then I'm going to just make a white layer to erase out the text here, or the panel. I don't love how this is like touching that, creating that tangent, so I'm actually gonna scoot this one over a little. And then I'm gonna scoot over the white. And now we have this all set up, I can just turn off my lettering layer, and you can see already it's starting to feel less tight and less digital. It's starting to feel like it has a human hand in it, which is exactly what we're looking for. So, all right. Next step. So I'm going to turn the sketching back on, and I'm actually going to... second layer. Oh, that's right. I have this other version of it. Clearly, I drew the panels for this version, so we'll stick with this. I'm going to actually change the color of this. You're going to want to go into color balance and then just shed highlights, midtones. Okay. I lied. What is happening here? I see. Okay, so like the opacity is turned way down. I didn't realize this. So if you turn it up, you're going to see that the color is actually black, and it doesn't really want to adjust if the color is too black. So you just want to turn up the brightness and then go into color balance, get into your mid-tones, and then you can adjust. So I like the blue. I think that it's a very like traditional comics pencil line. But you can go with like another color. Red is fine too, but I just like the blue because when I'm doing inks, I think I can see the black on top of the blue a lot better. All right, so panels, captions, dialogue. So those are our layers so far. I'm going to put the inks on top of the sketch, but I'm going to put it under the panels. And yeah, so I think that that's what's going to work. All right, so now we're going to just start inking. So this is just like, how do we make this look good? So the first thing I'm going to do is open up my sketches. Find the sketches that I liked. So I'm going to go with this guy, who, let me see, let me open. So I'm going to go with this guy and this sketch. So it's a really simple drawing, and, you know, I want him to feel like the dot eyes. I like the little nose shape. It's very simple, but I kind of want that for this book. So let's go with that one. And then I'm going to come into here. And if you have multiple screens, it's good to keep your sketch up on another monitor, so then you remember what you're drawing. And then I'm going to just start making this look good. So he actually has like a pretty square jaw, so I just drew it a little too round in there. He has this little chainmail armor, but I want him to look like a scared little boy almost. Like he shouldn't look too heroic. Okay. So that's one panel. You can make your panels as complicated or as simple as you want. I think that it's a good idea to balance complexity and backgrounds along with some simple panels without them. Normally my first panel, because it's the establishing panel, I would put like more detail into the background, but I'm leaving it out because I actually think that like reading the character and his expression, like that's the thing that I really want to sell in that image. And I'm going to really sell like the background here and here. So like I know that it's coming, so just make sure that like you have a good balance. There's no quantifiable way to say like, oh, this is the perfect amount of background per page. You're just going to have to kind of feel that out. And again, if you're starting to feel like you don't know and you want to practice more, like do more studies. I'm going to turn the text on a little bit because, yes, this is interesting. So I kind of like the fact that the ears are going over this caption box a little bit. So I can see from my placement that I can avoid the text still by doing that. So I'm going to just like peek it over the edge and see how that looks. So that means though that this layer has to go on top of the caption boxes. All right. So the thing about a donkey is that they tend to have like a kind of a big bump on their head. So it makes them feel like donkeys as opposed to like horses. I made his head a little too big. Because I want these ears to peek out, and big ears are kind of just like a thing on a donkey, I want to make sure that I don't make his head too large that it doesn't feel right. Their little manes are so cute too. They're very like short and stubbly, which is cute. I don't love how I like cut off his hand here, so I'm gonna try to like lift it up a little higher. Also, his hand is enormous. I don't usually do a pencil stage, which, you know, if I was, then this would be that pencil stage, because I kind of like my drawings to feel a little looser, and I usually think that my inks are fine. Of course, this is a preference thing. Like if you do like really loose sketches, like these are pretty loose. I could go over it with a pencil pass. I just don't. I do if it's like a really complicated drawing with like a lot of perspective in it, then I will do a pass like that, but not always. All right, so I didn't sketch in his body at all, but like clearly it would need to be here, so I'm gonna start drawing that in here. Making sure that we know it's this character, and by doing his like chainmail, that's my intention. And of course, because I crossed over the panel, or the caption box, I'm going to have to paint in the white. So then you're not seeing that. So it looks like that. It's pretty good. And because it's your first page, you're going to actually find like kind of what your feelings on the inking style are. And the reason I like to do graphic novels as opposed to single issue comics, which I do single issue comics, but I usually like doing graphic novels more, because when you get to the end of the project, you can actually like go back and fix it if you are like, oh, actually I like this brush better. I have never had to do that because usually I figure out what the style is going to be between having my proposal accepted and then starting to make the work. But I like that it's there. I have gone back to like fixed designs, because once you draw a character for like, I don't know, hundreds of pages, you definitely get a lot better at drawing them. So that's something that like I would really keep in mind when you're doing graphic novels. I'm gonna have him like start putting stuff, a big pack on his donkey. Oh, and then they have their cute little tails where it's like just at the end he's got the little bit. So cute. All right, so now we want to do a little bit more background stuff, because I want to show the world a little bit more. It's not just his, just the characters. This is also about where they live. I'm gonna draw a tree back here. This is not in the sketch, but that's the reason why I actually really like this stage of drawing, because I can actually like start figuring stuff out and just making things compositionally look a little bit better, making things look a little clearer, and just like have fun. You know, this is one of the more fun parts of the process. There's gonna be a big tree. I'm gonna draw his house. She's gonna have like a little thatched roof and like some Tudor style like wood on the outside. Here's a little door. So we're starting to get a little bit more story in here. I'm gonna actually, so I didn't draw the donkey in here, but I think I'm going to have this look as if he's like walking away. Originally he was just kind of like standing in a field, but like why don't we do this? Why don't we have this panel do double duty? He's leaving. Make sure we have the backpack on it. Honestly, I think the hardest part of doing comics, especially longer comics, is just remembering all of like the accessories that you put on a character, like all of the clothing and stuff. I think that like comic book writers, especially like normal superhero ones, those costumes are so complicated. It's like really crazy to me. I don't like how the tail looks because it doesn't feel like it's his tail. All right, that's a little bit better. I'm obscuring him here because I don't want too much detail when he's like so far away. He's such a small character on this page. I do want to keep his like little spikies though, because I think that that's going to really sell the design. But I don't want like too much detail in there, so I'm just going to block it out. He's on a path. I'm going to get rid of this grass down here. You watch for tangents. Yeah, so far I'm liking that. I like to zoom in and out too when I'm doing inking because I want to be able to not get too caught up in the line work and remember that like I also want to see what the whole thing looks like. These are like handmade crosses, so the fact that they're like kind of wobbly and maybe like they look kind of fucked up, or they look kind of messed up, is probably part of its charm. So maybe one of these is actually like nailed together instead of strung together. So then, you know, these were not maybe all made by the same people. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so then moving on. These three characters don't have designs because you see them for one panel. It doesn't really make sense to design a whole thing for them. You can, of course, like if you have a lot of extra time and you really, really want to get into like the nitty gritty of, designing every character. But I'm gonna just, I'm just gonna design them on the fly. I'm just gonna design them in the art, and that's something you can do in comics. This is the mother. I want her to feel, matronly in a way where she, is someone who would be very sad that her son was leaving. Very concerned. Her hands are clasped together because she's scared for her son. Pretty happy with that. All right, the father, I want him to feel like more scoldy. And a lot of that is just the expression, Again, we only see him for one panel. So as you're sketching a character, like when you're drawing their expression, that's kind of a good way for you to figure out, oh, okay, like this is the design. That's usually how I like to design characters anyway. I like to think about them in pose. So it's really fun to think about it that way. He's balding. Let's make him balding. Maybe I'll give him like a vest. He's supposed to be a farmer, so we don't want him to like look too nice. Alright, I put that top line back on the dad, and actually I like that, so I think I might just add it in for all the other characters. I think that looks better. Alright, we're going with that. Because it's a short and, it's not that big a deal for me to change this on the fly. That is something that you can do too. Just kind of work with it as it comes to you. But if you are doing like a bigger project and you've already sold the style, you might want to like check in with your editors to be like, is this okay for me to change? So the hermit, he's going to be like the most unusual one because he's not part of the family. So I'm going to give him like a long chin, big ears. He has a beard. And he's very bald. I wanted his staff to like exit out of the frame, so remember that we're doing that. Cool. All right, so I'm going to turn off my lettering to see how that looks and turn off my sketching. And now that I'm seeing it without like all the underdrawing, because I think underdrawing often makes the drawing look a little, or the inks look a little bit better, we can go back through and tighten up some of these lines. So from the line weight thing we talked about, you're going to want to just kind of emphasize anything that is touching the air. So like this donkey, I'm going to draw his outside, but these lines on the inside are going to stay pretty thin. Same with his arm. This is pretty good already just because we already like blacked out the character in there, so that looks pretty good. Ooh, you know what? I'm going to add some clouds and I think that would look nice. Clouds that are like pointing in the direction that he's going. Yeah, cool. Nice. I like that. Yeah, so I'm just going to go through and clean up those lines. Make that feel a little more clean. I'm not doing a ton of erasing. Like, again, all I'm doing is like adjusting the line weights. You could also adjust the line weight for things that are over other things, like her arms are over her body, so I'm going to emphasize that, like where it crosses over, like right here. All right, and then we're going to want to go back through and add the white back in to where we crossed over the panel. Cool. So I think that looks pretty good. This is how I would ink a page. This was a pretty simple page because I definitely was using a very simple character art style. And so like your time that you spend on every page might vary a lot. But yeah, this is how I would do it in Procreate. Alright, so after we've done the inks for this page, I actually really wanted to go into Clip Studio and show you guys some cool tricks that you can do with it. I know that earlier in the design phase I showed you guys how to use vector layers, and we're going to use a little bit of that. This isn't as useful for a short comic like this, but it will be really useful if you're doing a longer form project, like a 200-page graphic novel or a webtoon or something like that. So I think that this is just really cool information that I'm going to just share with you guys. And you can choose to integrate it into your process or not, like that's kind of up to you, but the more shortcuts that can work for you, the better your process is going to be. So I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of how I would do that in Clip Studio. All right, so we've already inked this page in Procreate, but I wanted to show you guys some really cool tools that you can use in Clip Studio, because I actually think that Clip Studio is a really powerful comics tool, and just knowing about the little shortcuts can really save you a lot of time and energy and save a lot of wear and tear on your physical body as well. So I took the comic page from before and I just lightened it. We're just using it as an underdrawing, and I'm going to show you guys some pretty cool little tricks here. So first of all, we have our character here, and we're going to just focus on him for now. So I'm going to take this little sketch and I'm just going to ink him the way that we did before. And Clip Studio can use Photoshop brushes, which is pretty cool. But there's also like Clip Studio specific brushes, which you can get from their online asset library, there's a lot of free stuff that's really good. You could also buy some really cool brushes. Unfortunately, Procreate and Clip Studio cannot share brushes. So, if you build it in Photoshop, then you can use it in both, but that's not necessarily the case all the time. So for this one, I actually picked a different brush because my Joe Lillington Procreate brushes are not something I can have in Clip Studio. So I actually just used this brush that I developed for Diana, Princess of the Amazons. And I like it just because it has this kind of inky brush feel, but it's also got some texture in it. So it's kind of got like a little bit of a like printed Riso copy, like a copier machine look, which I really like. So, all right, so I just sketched his head in, and the whole point is just to show you guys this next step. So as you're doing your comic, you can actually take this drawing that you just did and then copy and paste it into a new document. I'm gonna actually close that. All right, so in this new document, as you can see, we have our character that we just drew, plopped him right there. And now we can actually reuse that drawing over and over again. And in Photoshop, you're probably thinking, oh, I could always do that. But the cool thing about Clip Studio is if I wanted to duplicate this and create a new one, so we create a separate head, and let's say that you want to actually make it like smaller, right? Because like the scale of your faces is always going to change. So let's say that we're going to make this guy, this big, right? So now that you have him at a new size, you can see that the styles no longer match. Like the line is so much thinner. It doesn't look like it comes from the same world. It just doesn't look good. But Clip Studio has some pretty cool tools. So the one I want to talk about right now is called line correction, which is right here, the correct line. So it has this little icon, and it's usually the bottom one right above your color. And, it's got a lot of different things. So you can do control point, which means you're basically, controlling each of the little vector layers. Simplify vector line, which means like there's a bunch of points here, right? But you can actually simplify that so it becomes less curved. But the thing I like the most is adjust line width. So as you can see, again, it doesn't feel like it fits because the line widths are all wrong, right? So like we can actually, wrong direction. We can actually use thicken or narrow. And if I want to thicken it, because I want this to feel like they sit in the same world, I can just go over each of those lines and bring them up. So already that's looking a lot better, right? It's also a little too much detail in it. So like these little lines for his hair, like I probably wouldn't draw that if I was drawing him to the correct scale. So I'm just gonna get rid of those. His face, I'd probably get rid of the like top lid line just because, again, stylization wise, like when characters get smaller, I tend to just, especially in this level of stylization, I just do the dot eye. So that way it's the same character, and even though it's scaled down, it still fits in the same inking style. So this is a really great shortcut, and it's something that you can do to redraw your characters without having to redraw them. And anytime you can save labor like that, absolutely go for it. So the other thing you can do is actually do your model sheet first. So the way I showed you, which is like you're drawing it in your comic and then you copy and paste it out into this other document, you could do that, but you could also ahead of time, like let's just say that you've got a lot of time before you need to, get into final inks, you can actually like draw your character in all of the views that you're going to need. And then save that out. So yeah, I think that Clip Studio has got a lot of really cool tools, and this is one of them. I highly encourage you, if you're going to be doing a long form project, to explore these tools and see which ones are going to work for you. And for next week, what we want to do is have a clean black and white drawing for the inks, and then we're going to apply color. All right, see you guys next week.